The Emirates Airline's Festival of Literature. It's a sort of cultural twinning, the first of its kind here in Dubai. Those of you who have been to the Literature Festival before may know who I am. I chair lots of events and have been a very big supporter of it over 8 years. My name is Paul Blezard. I give you a warning. Film is not my language. Books are. So I have been blown away this evening. I've just called Matthew Brown a bastard for making a grown man cry 5 times in a row. Robert Kanigel, I've been a huge fan of since he first wrote this book in 1991. Can I have a quick show of hands? How many of you here this evening now have just come out of the film? How many of you cried? Be honest. We're all in the right place. Would you please give a huge Dubai International Film Festival welcome to the author of The Man Who Knew Infinity, Robert Kanigel, and to the director of the beautiful film we have just seen, Mr. Matthew Brown. Would you please welcome him to the stage? I suppose to be absolutely fair, I should also say Matthew is a genius for making me laugh through my tears. How many of you laughed? Yeah, good. We are in the right place. Actually, can I start with you, Robert? Largely this talk, just so we set it up properly, is going to be, as billed, about the art of adaptation, about taking an author's words and putting them into 100-minute, what is the runtime?
114 minutes?
114 minutes, visual depiction. 2 very different art forms. I've normally done similar talks like this with novelists. For it to be done with the work of non-fiction is a very different dynamic. And there are very few people who are, I'm not going to spare your blushes actually, Robert. Robert is an emeritus professor at MIT for teaching the art of communication to scientists and partly also teaching the art of science to people who communicate. But Robert is also something of a genius himself at turning into print, into ink on a page, the lives of people who mattered and the lives of people who made their lives matter. It's a question I'm sure you have fielded 1,000,000 times before, but we have to start somewhere, Robert. How did Ramanujan come to you? How did he first cross your radar? And then if part of the answer, you could also explain how that decision-making process worked with you for when you decide, actually, there's enough of a story here for me to have to live in this man's head for 3 years? 4 years?
Something like that.
How many years?
I think about 3 years.
3 years.
It seemed to me pretty unlikely at the time that it was going to work out. I think you've said something like that about the film, that how did we get here? How could it possibly have worked out? When I first heard about Ramanujan, I had never heard of him. I got a call from my agent saying, how would you like to write a book about Ramanujan? And I didn't know who Ramanujan was. This is not a romantic rendition. This is through a business connection, through an agent. And my first thought was, okay, maybe he's an interesting person, but what are the chances of this actually ever reaching print? But in fact, I started doing some very early preliminary research on who Ramanujan was. And very early on, I discovered that intimately wrapped up with Ramanujan's life was this other man, G.H. Hardy. And what had happened, to step back a little bit, the person who would end up being my editor at Scribner's had chanced upon a little reference to Ramanujan. I think it was his 100th birthday or something. She had mentioned it to my agent mentioned it to me. But nothing was foreordained at that point. So I wrote a proposal to this editor, whose name was Barbara Grossman, basically for the first time expressing the idea that I didn't have in mind solely a biography of Ramanujan, that it seemed to be that the 2 men were intimately related and that I wanted what amounted to a dual biography, where the tension and the energy between these 2 brilliant men would be at the core of the book. That's what happened. And I'm so glad to see that that Matt took it and ran so beautifully in his film.
Well, could we talk a little bit about that? You published the book in 1991. It was published in the States. It was extremely well reviewed. And then nothing for quite some time until you get a call. So, Matthew, perhaps you can explain to us how you came to read Robert's book and when that spark went in your head thinking, shit, this is such a good story, somebody's got to tell it in film.
Yeah, I came across the book. My aunt was a member of a book club in Northern California. I was up visiting, and I was introduced to the book there. And I'd been interested in the Great War. I'm a history buff. I had just read Birdsong, which is a fabulous book, and it just, I don't know. So I had an initial draw to it. It wasn't so much about mathematics or genius that I was interested in. It's funny you say you made this decision that you were going to do it as sort of a two-hander, because that's what drew me in. I love the idea of these two. I love conflict as a writer, especially as a screenwriter, and there's just so much built-in conflict between these two characters, and the stakes were so high for them. So I think that's what brought me to it. And then from sort of falling for the story, I don't remember all the steps involved, but I know that I had to go and meet with Robert in Boston. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, so it was kind of funny. I had to travel home about a couple blocks from my dad's apartment to sit down with Robert, and we talked for a couple of hours, and I was really, really nervous.
Nervous of what? He's a very nice man. He's very calm.
He's an MIT professor, and he'd written the book. I read it twice before I went to meet with him, and I think I never knew the book as well as I did, the story as well as I did at that point in time, because I was sort of preparing for an exam almost. Robert doesn't remember it that way.
That's what you brought to it.
I know. I was terrified, but yeah. Yeah, and then it's turned into a friendship. We didn't think it was going to take 10 years to make this film, but it did. I think everything happens when it's supposed to. But as a result, like a lot of great things have come, and we've remained friends for a decade, which is pretty incredible.
It is amazing.
So, yeah.
Robert, can you talk us through what happened? So the book's published in 1991. Matt gets hold of you around 2004?
2004.
13 years later.
Boston Red Sox won
But the
World
book is
Series.
precious to you. I mean, and
What's that?
the book is precious to you. You put your heart into it. You were committed to really telling this fantastic dual story. So when Matt comes along, looks 10 years younger than he looks now, and is nervous and sweaty in a Starbucks in Boston, trying to impress.
Maybe I was a little bit hardy-like. I didn't see his nervousness. Maybe he covered it over.
Yeah.
But of course, what Matt's asking you to do is to have faith in him, to place trust in him, that he's going to not kill your baby, in a way.
What had actually happened before Matt came along was that I had heard from, there must have been 5 or 6 people who had approached me and said, Mr. Kanigel, we'd like to do a movie based on your book. And the first time I heard this, I thought, whoa, that is so cool. They all disappeared. When I say disappeared, I mean that quite literally. They would have some contact with me, and I'd say, all right, I'll be happy to hear what you have to say. And then they never showed up again. They literally vanished. So when Matt came along, so earnest, so serious, so eager to do this project, the first thing he had going for him was that he came back again.
Yes, you just got to show up, right?
That's right.
First rule.
Yeah.
Did you have any reservations about it being turned into a film? With the 4 or 5 people that had disappeared, you'd obviously thought, how would they do that? Is that something I want to see?
No,
would it have value?
somewhere early along the way, I know how hard I work as a writer making a book. A book is a book. And I reasoned, maybe I'd read other things about this, but a film is a film. They are different media.
Yeah.
And from the beginning, I think I had the attitude that they are 2 different things, and whoever makes this film is going to obviously be taking, quote, liberties with the book by its very nature, because you're taking something that takes 8 or 10 hours to read, and it's going to wind up as a film that's an hour and a half or 2 hours long. So obviously and it's such a visual medium, so they're not the same thing. It's going to change, and I needed to have faith in Matt, and my faith was abundantly, what's the word I want? Confirmed. Matt, from the beginning, took it so seriously, what he was doing, and including the element of, this is a film about a mathematician. This is not going to be a mathematical treatise on film, but at the same time, we want some sort of sense or flavor of mathematics to show through in the movie. And he did it. He did it.
Okay, let's get to the nuts and bolts then, Matthew. He's written this book. Do you know who Terry Gilliam is, Monty Python? He and I have a theory, which we've worked on, and the theory runs, why are most of the films that come from a book crap? If the book is good, usually the film is bad. There are exceptions. Jaws, Peter Benchley's Jaws is an exception. Spielberg's film, even Peter Benchley says, much better than the book. And the theory that Gilliam and I have worked on over a long period of time runs like this. In the average book of 120,000 words, there are 600 to 700 events. We call them paragraphs. In the average film of 120 minutes, there are 60 to 70 events. We call them scenes. And compressing that to that, a lot gets lost in translation. Long introduction to a question, forgive me, Matt, but when you are then thinking, because you wrote the screenplay, which is a hell of a commitment, of filleting Robert's book and thinking, right, how am I going to do this? There are so many different narratives, there are so many different arcs of narrative. How do you focus on what you're going to pull out, what you're going to focus on, what gets lost?
Big question. So
forgive me.
The truth is it was a pretty big script. Larry Smith, who's the cinematographer in here tonight, will probably have a good laugh at this, because we had, I think there was, you said 70 scenes, more like 220, which was absurd for trying to shoot in our schedule, a real lesson for me as a screenwriter. But just to get to those 220, it was a massive endeavor, because you have a man's life. It's not just one man, it's two men, and you're trying to balance that. And I guess you just have to make decisions, and most of them, I would say, are instinctual. But, in the course of the 10 years of trying to get it made, as a screenwriter, I would get close to making the film and it wouldn't work out, and then I'd come back to it and I'd re-examine the script and I'd make changes to it. And you grow and you see if the script is going to grow with you, and things change. But in the course of it all, I think I really started to get a vision for the story I wanted to tell. Usually it doesn't take that long for most screenwriters, I guess, but it narrowed, and it really started with the relationship, and in the end it ended with the relationship. So you start to just focus it down to that. I had more scenes with the UDC stuff and the politics at Cambridge at the time, because I thought that was all fascinating. I had more scenes in India, because I always felt like it was incredibly important to understand where he came from, because otherwise you don't understand what he gave up and the cost. And it's really sort of the hero's journey, which I didn't really figure out until much later as a screenwriter, but you need that in the beginning. So I don't know, eventually everything just gets condensed down, and it's instinctive for me as a writer. I don't know.
I think there's one thing worth saying, that we're talking, the subject of our session here today is the adaptation of a book to a film. But there was a prior adaptation, which is to say, the adaptation of a man's life into a book. So it's a very similar process, if you think about it. You're taking 32 years, he had a short life. You're taking 32 years of a human life and trying to reduce that into something that can be read in a few days or a week. And Matt had exactly the same, well, not exactly the same problem, but a very similar problem.
Mm-hmm. Plus, he had such a fascinating story. So you want to include so much more, but it comes down to less is more. I think that's always the case. So.
No, I don't think anything is always the case. I think it's sometimes the case.
Well,
now you're being professor from MIT again.
I don't know. I put my editor's hat on a little bit,
But the dynamic that's going on between the two of you leads me to ask this. Did you have a conversation about how collaborative the genesis of the screenplay was going to be? Was there ever a chance that Robert was going to co-write it with you?
Never.
Sorry. No.
No.
That was a decision you took?
Well, I don't think we ever really took that seriously. It was
No.
Matt's intention to make a film and Matt's intention to write a screenplay.
Right.
And that's what
We
happened.
talked about a couple of scenes. I mean, Robert was always there for me. He opened up all his research to me. He was so supportive, and there was things that I was trying to understand and come. It's a heavy subject, and you know, he not only if you haven't read his book, you should read his book. It's one of the best biographies I've ever read, but he makes it able to comprehend to the layman, but it's still complex. So, you know, there was a lot of phone calls that came your way and saying, can you just try to help me get my head around this a little bit better? And we would talk through some scenes, and there was a couple times I was stuck, and he would write some stuff down and send it to me, and I'd laugh, and it was good.
Yeah, I had a couple of ideas for these terrific scenes, never having written a script in my life. And Matt was very wise and being very polite.
We were going to do this in 3D.
Okay, I know a little bit about you, and I'm not going to give secrets away. But your previous directing experience had not been a happy experience. Can I say that?
No, it definitely was not, no.
So for you, a massive decision to get back into the stream.
Mm-hmm.
For you, then, another massive decision to commit to what is, let's face it, although a fascinating story that we've now seen the result of, but a very difficult cinematographic challenge to tell this story, to get the emotional depth, to get the emotional temperature palette, to touch on the points of the actual fact of life, and the timeline that you can play with a little, but you have to stay true to the original autobiography and to the original life. There's honor and respect wrapped up in all this. Did you ever have, I mean, and it's a 10-year process, not that you knew that when you embarked.
No.
Were there ever those dark moments when you just clutch your head in your hand and you think, what the hell am I doing? Why the hell did I decide to do this?
Well, I think maybe even subconsciously in the beginning I chose it so that I would never have to direct again, because it was such a difficult film to get made. But no, I mean, I'm not. That's not really in my nature. I set out to make the movie, and you just, if you think about it, you'd never do it. You'd be paralyzed, and you wouldn't do it. So I just knew that this was something I wanted to tell, and I did everything I could to try to make it happen. And it was sort of the same in terms of actually directing, and you get to set, and you have all these problems thrown at you that you just can't even imagine, and you can decide whether or not you want to fight the fight or not. So you fight it.
So the process, I mean, often with processes, I've learned from your executive producer in a conversation with her yesterday, is that it all starts with the script.
Yeah.
And then you think about cast. And then you look at money. Is that how it worked for you? Was Irons attached early on?
No.
Was Toby Young attached? Was Dev Patel attached? How did that work?
No, I mean, we had different incarnations throughout the years of trying to get this film made. So we had thought originally, Ed Pressman had thought, you know, there's a lot of money coming out of India, and this will be easy to get made, and people will want to embrace this story.
Hold on, I'm sorry to interrupt. Come back a step.
Yeah.
So how do you go from having the idea, meeting Robert, doing the deal, and then when Ed Pressman comes into it? How does that work?
I optioned the story from Robert, and then I brought it to Ed through this woman named Sophia Sondervan, and then this other producer named Jim Young. The two of them were sort of my contemporaries, and we brought it to Ed, who is a very established independent film producer who is well known to support young filmmakers. He started the careers of some of the best filmmakers out there, like Oliver Stone and Terry Malick and some people I really admire. So I thought, well, maybe this guy will take a chance on somebody, and he agreed to do that. And he thought this was going to be an easy one to put together because he thought there'd be money in India from different people. But it was a very, very difficult film to get made, and it makes me sad. I wish it wasn't. Part of it was that I was a new director, so that doesn't help. But then Stephen Fry was trying to make this film, a similar film, a different take on the subject, but he's a huge star, and Stephen couldn't get the film made. So he eventually, agreed to come on to ours just because of how passionate he was, which was just such an amazing thing.
By the way, I have a message from Stephen.
Oh, really?
He's a friend of mine. I spoke to him this morning. I said that we were interviewing, that I met you yesterday. He said to send you his very biggest love. And he's bloody proud of you for having got it done.
Yeah, he's a good man. He's a good man. Yeah. No, Stephen Fry is amazing. He flew all the way down to Chennai to film for us for 3 days and turned right back around working a 14-day week just because of how much he cared about the movie.
So at what point did you start to finalize cast?
Well, so we went through different incarnations. It fell apart a whole bunch of different times. Dev Patel was way too young when this began, and he was just right when we made the movie.
Dev hadn't even done the first of the Marigold films by this stage, of course.
I don't think he had,
must
no.
have.
I think he was still
11
Slumdog.
years ago, no.
In fact, he hadn't even done Slumdog when I started this, I don't think.
Really? 11 years? No, he wouldn't have done.
No, so...
Good heavens.
But, Ramanujan was a sort of portly fella that was awkward, and he had this sort of innocent quality to him. And Dev, he's gangly. I mean, I think a lot of the young ladies admire him, but he's got the long legs and arms, and he's a little awkward, and I like that. I thought it had the same essence of what I was trying to go for. And Dev and I worked on it for a little bit on the script, trying to get it fine-tuned where we wanted to be with it. And then Jeremy read the script, and he just was magic. Jeremy's just a magic person, and he loved it and came into it, and he was a mentor for me. And so it started with those two.
Okay.
And then we started to go out to your sort of dream British cast, and it was like one after another. We kept getting yeses, and I was like, is this really happening?
So Toby Young, Jeremy Northam.
Toby Jones, Jeremy Northam. Jeremy Northam, who played Bertrand Russell, I fell in love with. I thought he was incredible.
Yeah, just extraordinary.
A whole wonderful, great cast. So it makes your job easy. Somebody told me once that 90% of directing is in casting, and I think they're right. It's a big part of it, because you're constantly being told, well, if you cast so and so, your movie will be financed, but then you're stuck with so and so for eternity, because it's long past when the movie's finished shooting. Then you're into the edit and you're living with the people, and then the movie's done, and then you're still living with it for years. So
right.
You better make the right decisions on that.
So Robert, you've signed over the rights. Matt's run off with them, doing his thing.
Sign my life away.
He calls from time to time for clarification.
Yeah.
But you're sitting doing your day job. In the back of your head, as the author, are you thinking, I wonder how it's going? How does that work in your own mind? And
just the way you described it, actually.
Right, okay, right.
You're working on whatever you're writing at the moment, and you wrote Ramanujan 20 years before,
Right.
but you're aware that there is this thing happening, the transformation of the book into a movie, and every once in a while, in an idle moment, you think, what's happening there?
And I get this random email. What is happening with this movie?
You'd email Matt saying, how's it going? Question mark.
And I tried very consciously not to be a pest. And there's a natural part of you, I think, that is a pest. What are you going to do with the movie? What's happening? But I try to hold it back, and I hope you appreciate it.
I did, believe me.
Did you get invited on set?
My wife and I went to England to watch, I guess, about 4 days of shooting.
That was incredible. What a moment, to finally get to make it and have Robert there and show up. And we were at Trinity College, and Trinity had never allowed any film, not even Chariots of Fire, to shoot there. And I think they felt a responsibility with this story to honor it, and they opened up the gates to us, which was unbelievable. So there we were sitting at Trinity. Can you believe this is actually happening? Yeah, it was cool.
It strikes me, Matt, I'm sorry if I'm not going to spare your blushes, but that you have a hell of a heart, that this meant something to you, and that you've lived with Ramanujan, forgive me, for 10 years. So when you get to go to Trinity, and you're walking through those gates, it's a bit like the look on Dev Patel's face when you...
It was pretty surreal. I mean, the junior bursar brings me and my whole crew into an office, and it's overlooking the great court, and he says, we're entrusting you with this. Larry, you were there that day. I mean, it was incredible. I actually almost got a little emotional, choked up. I couldn't believe they were giving us this opportunity. So,
actually, Larry, are you there? Do you have a microphone? Would you stand up for us, please, and take a bow? This is the cinematographer, ladies and gentlemen, Larry. May I ask you a question? Given that you are the first major feature production to be allowed to film within the hallowed grounds of Trinity College, Cambridge, feel any pressure?
Not really. I was like Matt I'd been to Cambridge before, and you kind of forget, you get a bit blasé when you're sort of from England, you hear these colleges mentioned all the time. But when you actually do get there, and in particular Trinity, which is the most magnificent place, you get submerged in the atmosphere of it. You feel very humble when well, I did anyway, certainly.
Thank you. So, let's come back to you. What are how heavy lies the responsibility to the original text, or to the story actually, and the original text as part of it?
Well, it's huge. It's huge, and you're never going to please everybody. There's no way. So I'm okay with that part of it, but I had to sort of be okay with my own standards of what would be all right. I mean, there was over the years, I've told the story before, but we'd been asked if there was a financier once said, well, if you could create a love story at Trinity where maybe he falls in love with a white nurse, this could work. And that didn't work for me. And
because it's not the truth.
Because it's not the truth. And now that's not to say that we didn't take liberties and change certain things, and you have to. There's no way not to with a film, and I don't have any problem with that, but I think we had integrity with how we went about storytelling it. And we did try to, as you mentioned with the mathematics, we tried to honor it. I tried to honor it as much as you could without alienating the audience. I wish I could have done more. I had hoped to do more visually with it. Larry very rightfully said, hey kid, this is your first rodeo here, really, so why don't we get the story down instead of working on neat camera tricks? And, I owe him for that, because I think the drama plays, and I don't know if it would have had I been running around with a chicken with his head cut off, but I think we honoring the story, honored your work with the story. It was important to me. I also tried to do stuff like I enjoyed this process. I love research. I mean, I'm a bit of a nerd that way myself, so I really enjoyed going through your research and reading other stuff. And I took the minutes of UDC meetings with Bertrand Russell and actually put in dialogue from those actual moments and little stuff. But I tried to use as much real dialogue that was existent that I could.
Something just occurred to me, and if this is wrong, as I said, film's not my language, then I apologize in advance, but it strikes me that this will be perceived in the same bracket as A Beautiful Mind, as those movies of genius, and I'm guessing they had much bigger budgets than you.
Guess right.
I don't know what the budget for this is, let's not go there. But it strikes me from the movie that I've just seen, that we've all just seen, that every dollar you had to spend is there on the screen. So can we talk a little bit about the peripheral stuff that often gets overlooked in conversations such as this? There is a name in the initial credits soundtrack where the surname is the same surname as yours. Should I read anything into that?
Yes, you should. Yeah.
Do tell.
So it's an interesting story. I mean, when I finally had Robert entrust me with this. Sadly, my younger brother, got very sick with cancer, and it's probably one of the reasons that I took to this story so much, because there were a lot of themes of isolation in the story, and it drew me to investing in the project. I don't know, it just related on a personal level. So as the years went by, my brother actually got better, thank God, the story shifted to a more hopeful, sort of bittersweet story. But in the end, he's a musician, and he did all the music for the movie. So he did the entire soundtrack, which was full circle. It was incredible. So, His name
Can I say, it's a hell of a soundtrack.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, Thomas
really
Newman
is.
would be proud of
You
that
tell him.
soundtrack.
Yeah, he's super talented. His name's Kobe Brown, so if there's any other filmmakers out there. But
Are you also his agent?
yeah, I could be.
You are now. And the
Yeah.
titles? Which are
The
beautiful.
title's Melissa Harrington, right in the audience here. She also did all the storyboards, and she did on-set photography. I mean, it really was a family affair. It was,
Stand up and take a bow, Melissa Harrington.
She's the also my girlfriend. No, everybody got involved. Family. I had my father was in the scene when he's about to commit suicide. He happens to be a psychiatrist, so it was kind of funny, and he's walking right behind Ramanujan in a top hat. And my stepdad was, we put everybody in it. I was even in hospital beds because we couldn't afford extras, so I would be directing with action, and I'm like lying in a hospital bed.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have a question you wanted to ask about the text, you could email Robert. So Robert, when you were writing the biography, were there any moments when you thought, if only Ramanujan was alive? There's a question there's no answer, only he would know. Only Hardy would know. Did you have moments like that, and what would those questions have been to Ramanujan?
I didn't. I think the mathematical literature has entertained the thought, what if Ramanujan lived?
Yeah.
What if instead of living till 32, he lived to 72 or 82? What could have come out of him then? And, obviously there's no answer. One of the other questions that the mathematical community has asked is, what if he hadn't been self-taught? What if he had gone to a regular university and come under the influence of traditional mathematicians and gotten, at one level, a jump up that he only got later, but on the other hand, maybe it would have crimped his style. Maybe it would have had a negative influence. So that too we'll never know. But it's interesting to think about.
I mean, there's a marvelous echo of that in Matthew's film, where Bertrand Russell says to Hardy, let him run.
Yeah.
Don't try and oppress him with the burden of proof. He's not that horse, he's not that man. And then Hardy's gentle and beautifully painted realization that this man is more of a genius than he will ever meet in the rest of his life, that he then gets it. And those marvelous, so that this is the language of God. He is speaking the language of God. I mean, there's some beautiful moments in there. Should we open it to questions from the floor? Because all these guys saw the movie, and you pretty much made 90% of them cry. It's only fair they get their own back. We'll start with the lady in pink, second row, and then come to the first row. So questions, please, both to Matt and to Robert. Can I just say, actually, before we start, thank you for making the dash from the theatre to here, and for being here this evening. Thank you all very much. Please, madam.
Yeah, thank you for a beautiful film.
Thank you.
Very refreshing to see how you added the Indian spirituality in it. And I don't know, everybody sees the film in his own way, but I felt that you really captured so beautifully the difference between the two worlds, and how perhaps, like what he said, the mathematics came from his own spirituality. How important was that for you to communicate that? And also, just one last thing, I really believe from a homeopathic point of view that people get sick out of their, if their souls are Sorry, I don't mean to sort of go into that. But it just beautifully portrayed how he got sick from that kind of difference in completely seeing life in a very different way, you know, compared to...
You know, it's interesting what you're talking about, him getting sick because of not feeling love, probably. But it was something that you brought up it made very clear in the book, and it was something I tried to use. Hardy was a guy, G.H. Hardy was a guy who took up causes, and he'd get very invested in causes. And I sort of viewed that in my interpretation as running away from himself, because he could just invest in other things. So once he had gotten Ramanujan to come all the way there and the war started, he invested in the war full time, you know, and I
don't know about full time, but he certainly invested in and put energy into it.
Enough so that Ramanujan felt incredibly isolated because all the other students are gone. He's there, the person it just was it was a big deal, and I think it contributed to his illness him getting sick. I mean, obviously because he wasn't helping him, but it was...
Yeah, clearly, I mean, I think the scientific establishment has confirmed that there are close links between the immune system and the nervous system. And if you're feeling under stress, and certainly Ramanujan was under immense stress from every angle, that we have no difficulty imagining how that could have contributed to him coming down sick, in addition to good old-fashioned germs.
Yeah. Mm. And the spirituality and India and all of that, I mean, that was just a decision as a writer and you had so much dedicated in the book as well, really, to understanding who he was and where he came from. And I don't feel like you would invest in the same way in the story had we just started with him showing up at Cambridge and only made it that way. So that was why that was important to me.
But I'm also told that you do have a strong affinity with Indian culture. It's actually part of your makeup.
I don't know. I don't eat beef. I mean, you know, I revere the cow. I haven't had. I mean, if I drive by a cow, I say I don't eat you. You know, I don't know where it comes from. It's like 15 years now. It's strange.
Question from the lady here at the front row, please, and then we'll come to the back.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. Robert, were there any bits in the book that were omitted in the film that you felt you would have liked to see included? And Matt, I was wondering what made you decide to omit his childhood and the moment where he discovers that he's capable of this sort of genius.
Excuse me, on bits of his life that didn't make its way in. Bits of the book that didn't make its way into the... I think at some point I noticed something that I would have liked to... Oh, Neville, that's right.
Yeah.
Neville. Neville was Hardy's representative in India and helped, or functioned that way, and helped bring Ramanujan to England. And later he wrote rather beautifully and evocatively about Ramanujan and the kind of person he was. And Ramanujan's first step into England was actually he stayed at Neville's house before he moved into one of the quadrangles. And I always liked Neville. And I think I would have liked to see him in the movie. Now, let's turn it around. What happens if you've already got a huge cast of characters and you're trying to basically bring out the essence of the story? Do you bring in yet another character? So I can certainly understand Matt's ultimate decision, but I felt bad for Neville a little bit.
I like Neville. I had scenes with Neville, and I cut him.
It's one of the cliches of writing, which happens to be true, that you have to kill your children. Yeah. You've heard all that many times.
You do it about 5 times as a filmmaker too. You do it as a screenwriter, and then you do it and do it and do it, and then you finally, as if you're a writer-director, you have to get off the screenwriter hat and put on the director's hat. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to do that, but you really have to. And then you have to just be ruthless with yourself as a writer.
There's one thing I want to say, which is if you've listened to Matt talk about his film, the idea of responsibility. We're seeing somebody who worked on this film for all these years and felt this intimate personal responsibility toward his work. And I think a lot of times in modern life, it just disappears. People have jobs, but they don't have this sense of personal responsibility. And I think we have here a model of that kind of responsibility at its best.
Thanks, Robert.
That's perhaps, if I may say, just so we don't skip over this, and I've interviewed a lot of authors in front of the directors that adapted their works, the most generous and kind comment I've ever heard an author give a screenplay writer.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful thing to have witnessed. You're a very generous man, Robert.
Yes, very.
Lady at the back. By the way, the hand signals earlier on was because the cinematographer had to leave. He's got to grab a flight. Is that right?
He's going to make another movie.
He's going to make another movie. The shameless tart.
Yeah.
Please.
This is a question for both Matt and Robert. I guess Robert first. At what point did you come to realize that you portrayed Robert's work in a way that would make him proud and honor the story? Was it after the movie was finished?
I didn't quite hear the very beginning of your question.
At what point did you come to realize
I think
that,
that, you know,
that he made the movie,
sorry.
that he made, like he made you proud in the movie? Because I'm sure as an
When I
author,
saw the movie.
Yeah,
only
she's
after you
asking
saw the
me.
movie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What the question's for both of you, but more so for
Okay.
Matt.
At what point I thought that I was doing right with you.
Ah, okay.
And honor the
And-
story. Yeah.
I think the time I was most nervous was, other than interviewing with him to get him to trust me with it, was when I showed him a first draft of the film. Not of the film, of the script. That was the moment when I shared a first draft of the script, and it was probably 132 pages long and needed a lot of work. But I sent it to him, and I was really nervous. And he had some really smart, helpful notes. And so, yeah, it wasn't so much, I mean, of course, when you see a final version of the film, that's another thing. But it was really, as a writer to writer, that scared me.
How long
you
did
know?
it take for Robert to get back to you with those notes? Because that's
Not
going to
long.
be terrible
No,
time.
it was pretty fast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What were your first thoughts when you see the first draft of the script and you know that this is a big moment for him? You figured that out by that stage.
I don't remember.
You don't?
I just don't.
It's like 100 years ago.
It was 100 years ago.
Yeah, of course.
It was, the first draft was 6 or 7 years ago, or longer maybe?
8 years, yeah.
8 years ago?
But
Which
it
is
was
great,
really
because
scary.
had it been terrible, he'd have remembered. So,
Yeah.
Right, it certainly wasn't traumatic.
No, it was for me.
Another question. Gentleman here, please. And then I'll ask a few more questions again.
Thanks. Just a question for Matt and maybe Robert as well. I'm a scriptwriter myself, working in the theatre and in film. Did you, and the technique that people talk about is getting it down to like one sentence or one driving thing that drove the story? Did
Yes.
you ever sort of do that? And I wonder if that's the same for Robert, or novelists probably work in a very different way. But what to you was the heart of the story, or that one sentence? For you first, Matt, if that's okay.
Well, do you want to go?
Go ahead.
I didn't in earlier drafts, but the last draft I got wise and I did a workshop in Los Angeles with this wonderful woman named Joan Shekel she worked at Sundance Labs, and she made us do, it was torture. I had to act, I had to do all the stuff in this thing and really get into exploring the screenplay and exploring the vision that I was trying to do to direct. And she really calls it the nugget. You got to break it down to the nugget, which is the one sentence. And what I discovered, and the script and the edit and the directing probably all tried to revolve around it, was it's about the cost that comes when people wait out of fear to connect in their relationships. So that was the nugget that I wound up having for this film. It's the cost that comes when people wait out of fear to connect in their relationships. So I use that as the mantra for me, and that's inevitably what I feel like the film is about. It's bittersweet, but at least they did connect. maybe that isn't exactly right, and everybody has their interpretation of what a film is, but to me, that's what I was trying to tell.
Can I expand on that guy's question, actually? It's a very good question, and come back to the lessons you've learnt about the art of adaptation. What do you know now that you wish you'd known 10 years ago? It's your question.
Everything. I mean, I've learned so much you learn so much as a filmmaker every step of the way, especially in the edit. Like, there's no place that's more painful than the edit of a film to really see what's going to work or not work as a screenplay. I mean, because I'm a storyteller, I'm a writer. I mean, I was like 10 years old when I wrote a composition in school that got my parents called into school for child abuse, you know? So it just happened to be that I love movies, and my last semester of college took a screenwriting class, and I thought, oh, well, this looks fun. So, yeah, I don't know. You're constantly learning the art of screenplays, and you're fighting against your own ideas of what is a writer and storyteller, and storytellers and writers don't necessarily have to go with screenplay structure. So, I don't know. Tricky.
Have you ever tried to write a screenplay, Robert? Is that a language that you have learnt through working with Matt?
No, I haven't. But I've occasionally, through this process, the back of my mind has been circling around with the idea. But it's at a very primitive level.
Well, you're a professional writer, professional storyteller. You're good at, I'm guessing you would have asked yourself the question, I wonder if I could. I wonder how that works.
I'm already, after many years writing biographies, I'm now at this advanced age flirting with a different genre, that is writing a memoir.
Right.
And that represents enough of a shift for now.
I think screenwriting is an underappreciated art form in and of itself.
Especially by the movie industry.
Yeah, sure. But just like, because nobody reads screenplays, you only see the movies, and it is its own thing.
It is an art form. What advice would you give then, Matt, to someone who is in the position that you were in 10 years ago, other than find a pressman, other than find
advice?
Because you will, I'm guessing, from this film, start to be having to field calls from 20-something film directors who want to be you.
I don't know about that, but
it's gonna happen.
I don't know what advice I'd give anyway. I think you just follow your path. And I mean, I have advice I give young filmmakers. We were in India and they were asking me, and my dad gave me great advice in the beginning, which was learn a trade in the industry while you're trying to become a filmmaker, and I totally ignored it. It was the stupidest thing I ever did, because I was learning. I could have been an editor or an assistant editor while I was trying to become a filmmaker, and I think that we as wannabe filmmakers, it's incredibly stressful because it's a hard path to earning a living while you're trying to pursue your art. But instead of going the editing path, I did screenwriting and was able to make a living. But it's a tricky line of work, trying to be a film director. So as far as like what I would tell somebody it's 10, I don't know, you just follow your passion. I mean, if it's truly your passion, then what are you going to do?
If you're going to commit 10 years to it, you better love it.
Yeah, 100%.
Same with books. Can we put something to the test? Can we put the bang to the test?
The what?
The bang.
What do you mean?
Matt's having a question as to whether the bang at the beginning of Act 3, when the Zeppelin bomb goes off,
I thought it was a little loud.
Is too loud. Anybody here think it's too loud? Well, let's see. Who thinks it's just about right? Because it's a shock. Who thinks it's right? Who thinks he should perhaps turn it down a notch or two on the Marshall amp? I think there's your answer. Notice that all the older people think it's perfect. Nice. I see what you did there. Do you have any more questions? Yes, please, sir.
How is it working with Jeremy Irons? Was it intimidating? Anything challenging?
You know, it wasn't intimidating because, this has been, I felt prepared. I was ready. He is one of the most amazing actors in the world, obviously, but he's one of the most generous, kind people if you're willing to work really, really hard and go the distance, and because he works really, really hard.
What does that mean? Talk us through what working really hard means in those terms.
I mean, never being satisfied, constantly trying to do something better. And it's tough because, you know, it's so hard to make a movie. And then in the middle of it, you have somebody constantly pushing you to do better. And which means, is this the best way? Like, there was a scene we were doing in the hall where Ramana John walks out. And I don't remember how the whole thing went down, but it all changed that day a little bit, where Jeremy winds up walking around the table and out. And that doesn't sound like a big deal, but let me tell you that, like, that was a big deal. And it was lots of little things like that, just constantly trying different things, being open to it, but also knowing what your vision is so that you can say no. And he was respectful of that, and I was able to say no, and he respected that. So working with a person like Jeremy Irons he was a mentor for me. I mean, I'm forever grateful. I've learned more about filmmaking from Jeremy Irons than anybody.
How much rehearsal time did you get with him? With him and with Dev
No,
and with Stephen
we don't get rehearsal time anymore. It's a sad thing on these smaller independent
None
films.
at all.
I don't even think you get them on the big films. It's the art of rehearsal. I mean, Sidney Lumet used to swear by it, and he would spend weeks in rehearsal, and it's just such a smart thing to do. If I was a financier, Joe Cohen's a financier, he's here tonight with us, he was my huge supporter on this film. But I tell any financier, it's the best way to save money during production, because you work stuff out ahead of time. So I'm a big believer in rehearsal, and I tried to spend time with Jeremy. We hung out at his house a bunch in the garden, going through the script for hours and hours, and really getting to that place. So when we got to set, we weren't having conversations questioning the script. We were there to work and then try new things if we had the time to do it. So rehearsal's huge.
I mean, it's a hell of a performance from him. I mean, to be honest, it's a noteworthy performance by Jeremy Irons, who has had one hell of a career.
Yeah.
Is anybody talking about prizes or anything yet? Is it too soon?
I am.
Good. You should.
I think people who've seen the film have recognized that it's, I mean, Jeremy really came and brought something very special and transformed himself in this, and it was a wonderful working experience for us. I mean, I'm sure, hopefully we'll get to do something else together.
And I don't mean to decry anybody else's performance, least of all Dev's. Very different.
Very different.
Very different performance from Dev, who we are used to being exuberant and loud and Slumdog and Marigold Hotel.
Yeah.
This is all about interior. This is all about...
Well, I said that to Dev in the very beginning. I said, listen, this is it's all interior, and you've got to sign up for this that way, and he did, and he was incredible. He's an incredibly intuitive actor. He's so smart. He was so intuitive with the script. He's just growing. He's growing, and I think this other film he has that's going to come out is also a really dramatic, great film. I think you're going to see him really, and he's such a lovely person too. So
there's a lovely moment that you mentioned earlier on when he's in the quad at Trinity, and he's just in trousers and a waistcoat, a white shirt, in fact, and you see that tall, slim, lithe angularity. And it's a really good expression of the internal stuff, that he just looks as uncomfortable as he emotionally will feel. What do you go on to do next? What happens next? What does this mean? This really puts you on the map.
I don't know. I mean, I have projects that I want to write and direct, and then I have, I'm for the first time getting scripts sent to me.
What would you like to do?
What would I like to do?
World of infinite possibilities. What would the
I just want to
be?
do stories that are meaningful, because it's so difficult to make movies that if you're going to do one, I want it to be something meaningful. I mean,
Robert has 6 other books.
Well, we were talking about that actually. So we are talking. Robert's an incredible writer, and I'm sure we will.
Take
on an Irish Isle.
That's a good story. Robert, what are you working on at the minute? Can you tell us what you're working on at the minute?
I just finished a biography of Jane Jacobs. Has anyone heard of Jane Jacobs here? Ooh, that's bad. Jane Jacobs was a woman who changed attitudes towards cities. She wrote a very important book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And she was a brilliant, brilliant woman who came out of nowhere. I just thought of it a little bit like Ramanujan, and turned the whole world of architecture and planning upside down. So I've been working on that biography for about 5 years.
And that's finished?
And it's finished. It's coming out in the fall of 2016 from Knopf.
And I will do this shameless pitch. For those of you that have seen the movie but haven't read the book is available. It's on Amazon. And if you brought a copy, he'll sign it tonight. Yes, we started with you. We'll end with another question from you, Madam in Pink.
Your profession is really intriguing. When you have quite dense research to do and you have to turn it into a story that people engage with emotionally and intellectually, what goes through your head to sort of, you obviously have an artistic streak to do that, so what special skill is needed to turn something that's quite, not everybody's into that much research generally, it's only in
you're
academia.
always
but
doing 2 or 3 things or 4 things at once. You're thinking of, I think about structure all the time. I think there are some writers who think at the sentence level. They want to write beautiful sentences, and unfortunately I'm not one of those. But I do think about form and shape and relationships and how long something should go on and what should follow it and what should not follow it. So there's this substrate of all this research material that's scattered through my office and in file cabinets and in books and in my head. And I'm in the position, in the kind of writing that I do, of adapting that to the structure that seems to be emerging. On the other hand, the structure comes out of the research material. So it's a back and forth pull and tug constantly. And that's what basically occupies me for 5 years. From the very, very beginning of the process, I'm thinking structure.
So much so that there are biographers in England that I know that refer to Robert as the Frank Lloyd Wright of biography. He is the brilliant architect of structuring somebody's life so that we get to read it in 2 or 3 days. And I haven't just made that up. That's true.
Really?
Yeah. Cool. We have to end there. One, because it's freezing up here. I don't know about you guys down there. Can I thank you for being a fantastic audience, for coming in to see the premiere of The Man Who Knew Infinity this evening, and then coming to this talk. But mostly, can I thank the wonderful Robert Kanigel, and this man sitting immediately to my right, Matt Brown, who I think we're going to hear a great many good things of in the years to come. Would you please give Matt Brown and Robert Kanigel huge thanks. Thank you. And congratulations, Matt.
Thank you. I just would like to say before we go, there's somebody in the back who is with me on this film from the beginning, practically, Pamela Godfrey. Wave, because you're very much responsible
Executive
for this.
producer, Pamela Godfrey.
and Joe,
without whom...
Joe Cohen, the financier here, who this would not have happened without. So,
thank you. Tell all your friends it's the movie they have to see.
Thanks, guys.
It'll make them think, it'll make them cry, it'll make him a career, and that's got to be worthwhile. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.